I wasn't supposed to understand her secret language. Until I spoke it out loud. Echoes in the mist, the morning fog clung to Lumina Valley like a lover reluctant to leave, obscuring the cluster of stone buildings nestled among ancient pine trees. Nico Reeves adjusted his scarf against the chill as he made his way up the winding path toward the village center. 3 weeks of research in this remote mountain community, and still the mist-laden air made his ears tingle in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Professor Reeves?" A gruff voice called from the doorway of the local tavern. Marcel, the owner, waved him over. "Another day with your chimes, eh? You academic types are persistent, I'll give you that." Nico smiled politely. "The Lumina wind chimes are unlike anything I've studied. The resonance patterns defy conventional acoustic theory." Marcel shrugged, unimpressed by scientific jargon. "Just make sure you're back before sunset. Strange sounds carry through the valley after dark." Nico nodded, though he suspected the strange sounds were precisely what had drawn him here. As a linguistics professor with an unusual neurological condition, synesthesia that allowed him to see sounds as colors, he'd built his career studying obscure communication patterns. But the centuries-old wind chimes of Lumina were different. They produced harmonic sequences that appeared in his vision as intricate, spiraling patterns unlike any language he'd encountered. The path eventually opened to a small clearing where 7 tall poles stood in a perfect circle, each crowned with elaborate copper and crystal chimes. As the breeze flowed through them, Nico closed his eyes and let the sounds wash over him. Purple and blue waves rippled across his mind's eye, forming patterns that almost, but not quite, resembled words. "You see them too, don't you?" a soft voice asked. Nico's eyes snapped open. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her dark hair swept into a loose braid over one shoulder. He recognized her as the reclusive artist who lived in the cottage near the village boundary. The locals called her Era, though few seemed to know much about her beyond her extraordinary paintings. "See what?" he asked cautiously. "The colors," she replied, "the patterns in the sounds." Something in her gaze made Nico's practiced skepticism falter. "How did you know?" Era stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful. "Your eyes track the harmonics. Most people just hear pretty chimes." She gestured to the leather-bound notebook in his hands. "May I?" Hesitantly, Nico handed over his research notes. Era flipped through pages of waveform diagrams interspersed with his colorful sketches of what he saw when the chimes sang. "Remarkable," she murmured. "You've nearly captured the third phrase." "Phrase?" Nico felt a surge of excitement. "Then it is a language?" Instead of answering, Ira returned his notebook and walked to the center of the circle. With practiced precision, she reached up and touched 3 chimes in sequence. The resulting melody sent a shiver down Nico's spine as indigo and violet patterns swirled in his vision, forming a distinct shape he instinctively recognized as meaning. "What does it say?" he whispered. Era's lips curved into a mysterious smile. "Come to my studio tomorrow at sunrise. I'll show you my paintings." She turned to leave, then paused. "The chimes don't speak in words, Professor Reeves. They speak in truths." As she disappeared into the mist, Nico stared at the pattern still lingering in his mind. For the first time in his career, he felt certain he stood on the threshold of something beyond mere academic discovery. Something that resonated not just in his mind, but somewhere deeper, where logic gave way to instinct and wonder. Whispers between worlds dawn painted the sky in delicate brushstrokes of pink and gold as Nico made his way to Era's studio at the edge of the village. The small stone cottage seemed to emerge from the mist like a mirage, its walls covered with climbing vines bearing tiny blue flowers he couldn't identify. Before he could knock, the wooden door swung open. "You're precisely on time," Era said, her voice carrying that same melodic quality that had captivated him the day before. She wore a simple linen dress the color of twilight, and the morning light caught flecks of unusual violet in her eyes. The interior of the cottage was transformed by light filtering through stained glass windows, casting prismatic patterns across walls lined with paintings. But these were unlike any artwork Nico had ever seen. The canvases seemed to shimmer and shift as he moved, colors flowing like liquid. "These are sound paintings," Era explained, leading him to a large canvas dominated by swirling patterns of blue and violet, exactly matching what he'd seen when the chimes had played. "I capture what most cannot hear." Nico stepped closer, mesmerized. "This is what I see when I hear the chimes. Exactly this." "Because you have the gift," Era said, her fingers lightly brushing his wrist. "Very few can translate between realms. Realms? Instead of answering, Ira guided him to a painting hidden behind a velvet curtain. This canvas pulsed with colors so vivid they seemed alive, patterns that made his synesthesia flare with sounds he couldn't actually hear. "This is the full sequence," she whispered, "the complete language of the chimes." Nico stared at the painting, the patterns embedding themselves in his mind until, without conscious thought, his lips formed sounds he'd never made before, syllables that tasted like starlight on his tongue. Ira's eyes widened. "You spoke it," she breathed, her voice trembling. "After all this time." She stepped closer, her hand rising to touch his cheek, and responded with a phrase that sent waves of iridescent purple cascading through his vision. Though he understood not a single word, the meaning registered clearly. Recognition, wonder, hope. "What is this language?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "It's called Australis," Ira replied, her face inches from his. "It cannot lie. Each phrase carries the speaker's true emotion. It's why so few can speak it. And you? How do you know it?" Ira hesitated, then took his hands in hers. "My ancestors were not from Lumina. Not from this world at all." Before Nico could process her words, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently against his. The contact sent a wave of sensation through him unlike anything he'd experienced. Not just physical desire, but something deeper, as if her very essence reached out to his. When they parted, he gasped as violet light seemed to shimmer briefly in the air between them. "That was," he began, unable to find words. "Truth," she finished for him. "In Australis, a kiss is also language." That night, Nico couldn't sleep. He sat at the small desk in his rented room, transcribing the patterns from Ira's painting into his notebook. Each sequence he sketched resonated in his mind, producing sounds he could almost but not quite pronounce. A tap at his window startled him. Ira stood outside, her figure silvered by moonlight. Without a word, she beckoned. Following her through the sleeping village, they returned to the circle of chimes. Under the stars, the crystals glowed with a faint inner light. "Watch," she whispered, and touched 3 chimes in sequence. The resulting melody made the air itself seem to thin, and for a moment, Nico glimpsed something beyond the night sky. A vista of impossible beauty, a world where mountains floated and twin moons cast violet shadows. "My home," Ira said softly, calling to me. "To us," she turned to him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "The language is a bridge, Nico, and you may be the one who can finally repair it." The color of words morning found them seated cross-legged in the meadow behind Ira's cottage, surrounded by her open sketchbooks. Nico watched, transfixed, as she guided his hand through intricate gestures that accompanied each phrase of Australis. "The language lives in the body as much as the voice," she explained. "Each gesture amplifies meaning, connects intention to expression." When Nico mimicked a flowing movement while pronouncing a challenging sequence, the air between them briefly shimmered with violet light. He felt a surge of something warm and electric flow from his chest to his fingertips. "I did it," he whispered, staring at his hands in wonder. Ira's smile was radiant. "Yes, you're learning faster than anyone I've ever taught." Her expression grew thoughtful. "Though I've only taught 3 others in my lifetime." "How long have you been in Lumina?" Nico asked. She traced patterns in the dew-damp grass. "Time moves differently between worlds. I came here when the village was just 7 houses, after the rift between our realms began to close." "A rift? Like a portal?" "More like a natural crossing point. My ancestors discovered it centuries ago, built this village as a meeting place between worlds." Her voice grew softer. "We brought knowledge, they gave us sanctuary. But over generations, as fewer could speak Australis, the connection weakened." As she spoke, Nico noticed how the morning light caught unusual undertones in her skin. Not quite iridescence, but a subtle shifting quality that reminded him of opals. When she moved certain ways, he could almost see a hint of violet beneath her surface. That afternoon, they returned to the chimes. With newfound confidence, Nico touched the sequences Ira had taught him. Each resonant note drew forth colors that now formed distinct phrases in his mind. "I can almost understand it," he said excitedly, "like it's becoming part of me." Ira's expression was complex, joy mingled with concern. "The language changes those who learn it. Your perception will never be quite the same." As dusk approached, they sat side by side on a fallen log, shoulders touching, Nico found himself hyper-aware of her proximity, the subtle scent of those strange blue flowers clinging to her hair. "Teach me how to say something important," he requested quietly. Era turned to face him, her eyes searching his. She spoke a phrase that sent cascades of deep violet and blue through his vision, the sounds resonating in his chest like music. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. "My heart recognizes yours across the void," she translated, her fingers intertwining with his. "It's an expression from my world that has no direct equivalent here." Something shifted between them in that moment. Nico leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips connecting in a kiss that deepened as her arms wound around his neck. This time, the sensation was even more intense, colors exploding behind his closed eyelids, a feeling of falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally parted, breathless, the trees around them seemed to glow faintly with reflected light. "Did you see that?" he gasped. Era nodded, her eyes wide. "The boundary is thinning. Your ability to speak the language, it's strengthening the connection between worlds. Is that dangerous?" She touched his cheek gently. "It depends on what comes through. There are those in my world who would use the connection for their own purposes. It's why the language was forgotten, why the chimes were built to maintain just enough resonance to keep the door from closing completely." As night fell completely, Nico realized he could now see faint, glowing patterns in the air around them, energy currents he'd been blind to before. With growing certainty, he understood that learning Astralis wasn't just academic curiosity anymore. It was changing him, opening his perception to things beyond human experience. And as Era's hand remained firmly in his, he found he didn't fear the transformation at all. Patterns of light 3 weeks had passed since Nico first spoke Astralis, and the village of Lumina had transformed before his eyes. What once appeared as ordinary mist now revealed itself as currents of energy flowing between worlds, shimmering with faint violet light when the wind chimes sang. The locals remained oblivious to the change, but Nico could no longer unsee the truth. Lumina existed at the intersection of realities. In Era's cottage, surrounded by her paintings, they spent hours each day, deepening his understanding of the language. Words and gestures flowed more naturally now, his body remembering patterns his mind couldn't fully comprehend. "Your pronunciation of the transitional phrases is nearly perfect," Era said, her smile warm with approval as she lowered herself beside him on the cushioned window seat. Outside, rain pattered against the glass, creating its own melody. "I have an excellent teacher," Nico replied, letting his fingers trace the curve of her jawline. Their relationship had evolved alongside his linguistic abilities. Each shared phrase of Astralis seemed to bind them more tightly together, creating an intimacy beyond physical connection. When they touched, violet light sometimes sparked between their skin, a visible manifestation of something deeper taking root. That evening, as thunderclouds gathered over the mountains, Era led him to a hidden chamber beneath the village library, a circular room with walls inscribed with the same patterns he'd seen in the chimes. "The original gateway," she explained, running her fingers over the ancient markings. "This is where my ancestors first crossed between worlds." Nico circled the room slowly, recognizing phrases he'd learned. "What happened to the others like you?" Era's expression grew distant. "Some returned home when the rift began closing. Others chose to remain, gradually becoming more human with each generation." She hesitated. "I am the last with enough of my ancestral essence to maintain the connection." "And that's why you've stayed? To keep the door from closing completely?" She approached him slowly, her movements graceful even in the dim light. "Initially, yes. It was my duty." Her hands found his, intertwining their fingers. "Now I have other reasons to remain." The air between them thickened with unspoken emotion as Nico pulled her closer. Their lips met in a kiss that started gently but quickly deepened with hunger. Violet light emanated from where their bodies pressed together, illuminating the chamber in ethereal glow. "Era," he whispered against her neck. "I'm falling in love with you," she responded in Astralis, a phrase that sent shivers of blue and purple cascading through his mind. The meaning registered immediately. Not just "I love you," but something far more profound. "My soul recognizes yours across all realms." Their embrace intensified, hands exploring with growing urgency. As clothing was discarded on the stone floor, Nico gasped at the sight of faint luminescent patterns tracing Era's skin, delicate swirls that followed the curves of her body like constellations. When his fingers traced them, she trembled. "They're beautiful," he murmured. "They show only for one who truly sees me," she replied, her voice husky with desire. Their union transcended physical pleasure, each caress exchanging not just sensation but meaning. As they moved together on the ancient stone floor, the inscriptions around them began to glow in response, pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats. At the moment of culmination, the entire chamber blazed with violet light, and Nico felt himself simultaneously in two places, the underground room and somewhere vast and beautiful, where twin moons hung in an impossibly starry sky. Later, wrapped in Era's cloak, they lay entwined as she explained what had happened. The gateway responded to our connection. For a moment it opened completely. Nico stroked her hair, still damp with exertion. "I saw your world. And it saw you," she said, her expression growing serious. "Which means others now know a speaker of Astralis exists here again. Is that dangerous?" Era sat up, the cloak falling away to reveal the fading luminescent patterns on her skin. "There are factions among my people. Some believe we should reclaim this world, restore the full connection." She touched the inscriptions on the wall. This gateway was sealed partially to prevent them from crossing over. Only the chimes remained active, maintaining minimal contact. And now? Now the seal is weakening. "Every phrase of Astralis you speak strengthens the connection." Her eyes met his, filled with conflict. "Tomorrow night marks the alignment of our worlds, when the barrier between realms is thinnest. If you speak the final binding phrase then, the gateway will fully reopen." Nico felt a chill despite their shared warmth. "What happens if it opens?" "Everything changes," she whispered. "For both worlds." The final phrase dawn broke over Lumina with unnatural brilliance, sunlight fracturing through mist that now visibly shimmered with violet energy. Nico stood at his window, watching villagers go about their morning routines, oblivious to the threads of light connecting everything around them. His transformation was nearly complete. After last night with Era, his perception had shifted permanently. He no longer just saw the patterns. He felt them resonating in his very cells. When he spoke even simple words in his native tongue, faint colors accompanied his breath. Marcel stopped him outside the tavern, eyeing him strangely. "You look different, Professor. Found what you were searching for in those chimes?" "More than I expected," Nico replied, unable to explain how profoundly true that statement was. The old man nodded knowingly. "Village legend says those who understand the wind's language either leave Lumina forever or never leave at all." Throughout the day, signs of the approaching alignment multiplied. Birds flew in spiraling patterns that mimicked Astralis phrases. The chimes in the clearing played constantly despite the still air. By afternoon, even the least sensitive villagers commented on the strange atmosphere, the peculiar quality of light. Era found him by the village well, her expression tense. "They're coming," she said without preamble. "I can feel them gathering on the other side." "Your people?" "The Veldari faction. Those who believe this world should be harvested for its energy." Her fingers gripped his arm urgently. "If the gateway opens fully, they'll come through first." As sunset approached, they stood together in the chamber beneath the library. The inscriptions glowed steadily now without stimulation, the barrier between worlds thinning by the minute. "There must be another way," Nico said, pacing the circular room. "Can't we open the connection partially? Allow communication without full access?" Era's eyes widened. The original binding was all or nothing because no human could pronounce the modulation phrases. She touched his face wonderingly. "But you're no longer fully human." "Nico, your connection to Astralis has changed." Hope flickered between them as she quickly taught him a complex series of sounds, a variation on the final binding phrase that would create a selective barrier. It would allow passage only for those with peaceful intentions, she explained. The Veldari could not cross, but others could. Communication and exchange without conquest. As the twin moons of her world aligned with Earth's sun, visible now through the chamber ceiling as overlapping shadows, Nico stood in the center of the inscription circle. Era joined him, their hands clasped tightly. "If this works," she said softly, We could exist in both worlds, together. The air thickened as Nico began to speak, each syllable of Australis manifesting as visible sound waves of violet light. The final modulation phrase was enormously complex, requiring precise control of tone and breath. As he approached the conclusion, he felt resistance, like pushing against a powerful current. "They're fighting the barrier," Era gasped, her form momentarily flickering between human appearance and something more luminous. "The Veldari sense what you're attempting," Nico faltered, the phrase breaking apart. Immediately, the inscriptions flared dangerously bright, the gateway beginning to open without restrictions. Through the growing rift, he glimpsed shadowy figures moving with predatory grace. In desperation, Era pressed her lips to his, sharing breath and intention. The kiss transmitted something essential. Suddenly, Nico understood the modulation at a fundamental level. Their voices joined in perfect harmony as they completed the phrase together. Violet energy erupted from the center of the chamber, spiraling outward through lumina and beyond. The inscriptions rearranged themselves, forming a new pattern that pulsed with stable light. Through the ceiling, they watched as the overlapping shadows separated, maintaining proximity without merging completely. "It worked," Era whispered in awe. The gateway remained, but transformed. Instead of a door flung open, it had become a permeable membrane. Through it came flowing streams of light and knowledge, but the shadowy figures had vanished, unable to penetrate the selective barrier. In the days that followed, subtle changes rippled through Lumina. The wind chimes sang with new harmonies. Villagers reported unusual dreams and flashes of insight. A few, like Marcel, began to perceive the faint patterns in the air. On the 1-month anniversary of the alignment, Nico and Era stood in the clearing among the chimes, hand in hand. Their bodies both occasionally shimmered with inner light, Nico's transformation continuing as Era's connection to her ancestral world strengthened. "What happens now?" he asked, watching distant violet lightning dance between clouds. Era smiled, her eyes reflecting impossible constellations. "Now we build a true bridge between worlds. Not conquest, not isolation, but exchange." She placed his hand over her abdomen where the faintest glow had begun to form, and perhaps something entirely new. Nico's breath caught as understanding dawned. Their child would be the first natural crossing, neither fully human nor entirely of Era's kind. "The beginning of a new language," he said softly. Around them, the chimes sang in joyful agreement, their melody carrying across two worlds that were no longer entirely separate, joined forever by love expressed in syllables of light.